you start to craft your message or your campaign in a shape and form where you're putting yourself, your company, or your product in the center of it all. And you're putting your marketing, your campaign as the hero, right? Your product is the hero that solves everything. We forget that the product is nothing without the people using that product.
This is Brand Story, a podcast featuring in-depth conversations with leaders, marketers, and brand storytellers about their professional journey and the impact they are making on the world around them. Welcome to the Brand Story podcast. I'm your host, Steve Gilman, and my guest today is Michael Smith. Michael is an accomplished brand and creative director and is currently the brand director for Fountain. And he spent many years with American Express as director of brand strategy, global advertising, and brand management. And he also worked as a brand manager for brands like Unilever and Avon. Hi, Michael. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to talk to you today. You've had such a breadth of experience, and you've worked in many different industries and in a lot of different segments, and also worked in B2C and B2B. And I think that's really unique. And, you and I got to talk a little bit before this episode, and I think you have a lot of points of view on being a brand manager and some of the things we'll talk about. I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Looking forward to it.
As a brand manager, I imagine that what you do is provide leadership of one kind of another to a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. So what's a surprising thing that you've learned about leadership, something that maybe you didn't expect over the years?
Well, I guess when you're coming out of college and you're thinking of leadership, you think you have to be this person that has all the answers and clearly dictates what has to be done. But then as you step into leadership and you have more of a leading role, you start to realize that you don't always have the answers. And actually leaning on your team and leaning on the expertise of the individuals on your team is really what leadership is about. And it's bringing those thought leaders together and pushing it all together in the same direction. So that's for me what is leadership versus what I thought leadership might have been going into college.
It's amazing how many people think leadership is being bossy and telling people what to do. And, there's a surprising amount of empathy in leadership and listening. And that's one of the things that I think that you're really in touch with, knowing, having talked to you and knowing a little bit about you. So how much do you think you're really just listening to others?
Well, I consider myself a little bit of a talker, and I have to remind myself, I'm being completely honest. Sometimes I have to remind myself, like, Mike, stop talking. But I think empathy, when it comes to just brand management overall, is a key factor of success. And why do I think empathy so important? It's not necessarily only about leading your team. It's also when you're in brand and marketing, you have to have empathy with your customers. You have to have empathy with your target audience and understanding the people around you, the stakeholders, the people that you're working with, but also the people that you're serving, and trying to, for the lack of a better term, persuade to buy your products or your services. I mean, that is, if you don't understand what their needs are and where they're coming from, I mean, then you're just not, you're going to have a hard time being successful.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of arrogance sometimes in marketing where,
oh yeah,
marketers just assume I know my target audience. I know what they need and what they want.
Absolutely. Like, especially when we think, oh yeah, we have all this research, we have all this data. I asked 20,000 people and they said, the best way to talk to you is by putting a huge, taking over a huge billboard in Times Square and just talking down at you and telling you what you need to buy. You could be fooled if you use the data the wrong way, for sure. And marketers they tend to be, legendary in that, especially when you first start off. Yeah.
Yeah. When you're a young marketer, that's part of maybe the attraction, and then part unfortunately, and then part of just a trap people fall into.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
I think it can be cultural. You're coming at things from only what you know, and you're thinking that an audience is a monolith and not a group of individuals. So I think empathy in marketing and brand are probably the top skill.
Oh, I mean, I completely agree. I think they all go, yes, absolutely all hand in hand. And it's something that very often marketers or leaders in marketing positions tend to forget. I'm sure they're aware of it, but then once you're in the heat of the battle, sometimes you just lose sight and you're like, oh yeah, the data is saying this, and so I'm just going to follow the data and use that as an excuse. When in fact, just talking to your customers and really to get to know their context, that is essential. Without that, you don't really understand them because data can only tell you so much, but the conversations, focus groups to a certain extent, gives you a little bit more of the softer context of the data.
It's really interesting how sometimes there's sort of a divide between B2B and B2C. And I know you've done a
Yeah.
lot of both kinds of marketing where, B2B marketers feel like, well, all business people make decisions logically. They don't use emotion. They park that at the door because they're business people. So when you're
Oh,
working,
absolutely.
yeah. So how often did you run into that kind of thought process?
Oh my God. I mean, when I transitioned over from the B2C world, actually, I came from Avon. My last gig in the B2C world was being a global brand manager in Avon, and actually for a hair care brand. And as I was transitioning, I had a small startup. I tried my luck. This was 2012, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm a hot shot. I know exactly what to do, and you know, fell flat on my face, but I learned a lot. And the business I was in really was more on the B2B side and social data analytics and tapping into social media. And that was my first, experience into how to start building B2B marketing messaging. And obviously I didn't crack the code at that point in time. And you might say I might still not have, but I started to find out that I really like that. I really like B2B because it tends to be a little bit of an open space, a little bit of a wild west when it comes to marketing still. I think marketers haven't quite figured it out just yet, or brand people. And so I joined American Express after that, as a brand strategist. And that's where you start to one thing, yeah, where you start to really dive into getting to know the customer. And I had obviously the arsenal of the research of American Express on hand. And one of the things that I've learned at that business, at that organization, was really how to put the people in the center of everything you do. And what we mean by that is, or what I started to realize was that at the end of the day, you're marketing to people, right? The people are the ones that are going to make a decision, the buying decision, if they're going to go with your service or not. Now, on the B2C side, you might be more playful, you might have more leeway to be quirky, however you want. And on the professional side, you might not want to go always down that route because, of course, you're seeking to build trust with your audience. But at the end of the day, the person making the decision, if they're going to write the check for your service, is that manager, that director, that VP, that CEO. And that person has personal interest, might have personal agendas that you have to take into consideration. It's not just about, hey, we can give you cheap service, or hey, we can give you the most effective and efficient. But sometimes it's also like that decision maker there wants to get the best tool for their team, or wants to look good with their boss, right? And advance in their career. So sometimes those kind of things is what you have to take into consideration and really put the human being in the center of that, not the business. You're talking to a human, you're not talking to that business.
I love how you put that. And I think that's something that I've seen in B2B too, is that there are so many B2B marketers that think everyone's buying logically and buying because of proof points and features and benefits. And it's just almost a crime because people in B2B, like you said, are people, and people are emotional beings. So they want something. They have hopes, they have dreams.
I think what is also important is that they have opinions of brands, right? And brands that they want to be associated with. Now, this other brand might be more cost effective, but if they take brand B, they might look better. They like that. It's a good, better dinner story, right? It's also something that they want to associate themselves with. Like, I don't want to be associated with a no-name brand. Maybe they're much better, but I don't know who they are, and I don't want to be associated with them. But I want to be associated with this brand because I know that they're well known around the world. They might not be most cost effective, and they might not even have the best customer service. But I'm going to go with them because if by association I look good, we look credible, and so therefore I'm going to take this brand B. Now that is not always the case, obviously, but those things do factor in.
I think it's more often the case than not, because I think people make buying decisions probably 90% emotionally, and then convince themselves with proof points that they made that decision logically. I think that's what human beings do in almost every buying scenario.
I'm guilty. I'm guilty of that buying. Every time I go into a buying decision, sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, this is my price point. And I go there and then I see a price point that might be 30% higher. And you see the other one that's 30% lower, but you're going like, yeah, but this is a brand I like, actually. I'm going to go with this. And that's the power of brands, right? Power of a strong brand gives you as a business the opportunity to, on the one hand, especially on the B2C side, drive volume, right? But also command a price premium, and so increase your margins. Because at the end, sometimes certain products are coming out from the same factory. It's the same factory coming from the same producers, but putting that one logo on there just increases the price tag by 300%. And that's a phenomenon, but people like that. And I am guilty. And maybe that's why I'm in brands, because I do like brands.
Yeah. Well, I'm guilty too. And I think it's, you mentioned association. People want to join tribes and be part of things. We are humans, so we want to join and be part of something. And there is a certain implied warranty or cachet of, like, in a business environment, if I chose this brand because the brand says something, it means something, and it means something to me, and everyone will think my decision was good. But then personally as well, we make these decisions not logically. We make these decisions emotionally because that's just how we're built. So a strong brand, I think, is the differentiator.
And I love what you just said when it's like belonging to a tribe. Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It very much is so. And human beings, they seek that connection to others. And that's the identifier, oh, I belong in this tribe. So obviously through brands, you can have multiple brands. You can belong to various different tribes at different levels, whenever, different situations. But yes, I like that.
Yeah, I think it's just one of the things that we do. And I find it fascinating too, because I love watching, consumer behavior, whether that's on the B2B or B2C side. But I've always been fascinated that B2B marketers think it's different. And there are nuanced differences, of course, because you're not buying personally and you're buying for an organization, and there might be more due diligence around price or et cetera. But still, brand is going to carry the day most of the time.
Absolutely. And I think that's the exciting part about B2B. You don't see yet many like brands going down that purpose-driven world, or on the B2B side at least, or infusing it with emotion. But you're starting to see more and more brands trying. They're trying to show up funnier. They're trying to show up more understanding with a human. Common phrase you see here in corporate world is how we have to infuse more humanity into our marketing, whatever that really means. But I think that's the exciting part about B2B, because you have everyone's trying to figure out, and so it's fun. It's a little bit of a wild west, and it's a very fun, ever changing area to be in. Whereas B2C, I think, yes, that too, especially with new technology, but at the same time, B2C has a little bit of a formula down, right? One of the things I've learned when I went to Unilever and Avon was really, okay, how to craft a message, how to craft the design and set up a campaign, and how to really go from, hey, did you know about this newest product, to detailing the technology behind the product and all that stuff. And so there's a formula there, and I think in B2B there might be in certain occasions, but I think a lot of marketers are trying to figure it out. and trying to find that hybrid world in between based on all the things we just talked about.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it makes it a lot of fun. And I think it is, in some ways, the Wild West because, there are so many different kinds of companies with different brand stories and different backgrounds and reasons to exist. And so many that just don't tell their story very well. Um,
Or don't have a story, or don't really have a story.
they have products, they
Yeah,
just don't have a story.
exactly. We're in to make business.
Yeah, we're here to make business. Yep. That's really funny. So how important do you think story is to a company and to marketing?
I mean, personally, I love stories, and my wife would always say, "Oh my God, here comes Mike. He's a storyteller." He loves stories because I always think it does boil down to the story you can tell, and the brand purpose, if you so want. Now, I know we were just joking about, I guess, our brand purpose is to make money kind of thing. But at the end of the day, studies have shown again and again, especially on the B2C side, right, that purpose-driven brands or brands with a very strong focus on a reason to be um, just outperform those that are just like trying to push product, right? And if you take that into consideration, then more companies should be doing this. Now, why is that they're not? It could be that, to your point, it could be just people have a hard time when it comes to selling a business product and infusing it with some kind of emotional background or emotional purpose, right? And and sometimes I think when people think about purpose, they all think about like I don't know, Patagonia or like big brands that really make a difference in the world and are changing things. And sometimes brand purpose can be very simple. It can just be, like consistency. It could just be that. If that's your purpose, then and you want to make sure that consistency is across everything. Well, that's what brings everyone together internally, through all of your employees, your marketing, your communications, all the touch points. You focus on consistency, right? And so that's what a brand purpose does, and it really hones in all the energy, and that's what makes you successful. And so sometimes I think we marketers and we brand folks, we try to over engineer things because now all of once like a CEO comes down and says, "Hey, give us like let's think about the brand purpose," and then we try to have too much fun and over emotionalize things, and when in fact we can just keep it crisp and to the point. And I think that's the hardest part about finding brand purpose is really tweaking down to the point where you might have just one, two, three words that best describe what is it that you're doing, what's your essence of existence, why is the brand here, and why are we getting up every single morning. And the crisper we can do that, the better you then can communicate and get your own employees to get motivated and back the brand.
Yeah, that's really well said. I'm really glad you said that. And I think the thing you said about Patagonia, I think, is what gets in people's way. Is they think about their own brand and they're like, well, I'm not Patagonia, so I might as well give up.
I mean, I love Patagonia.
Yeah,
Don't get
so
me
do I.
wrong, but yes, not everyone's Patagonia, and you don't have to. You don't have to be.
Exactly. But it's like we're all showing up for a reason. And if there is a founder and there is a story, the business came out of somewhere and there is a reason for it to exist. And most of those reasons are going to be emotional.
Yeah,
So I think it's just this weird thing in business where people just aren't comfortable with emotional reasons. They want factual reasons.
I guess, yeah. They haven't gotten comfortable with emotional reasons because they can't really back it up to your point with facts. And it's also something, it is a little bit of a challenge, especially when it comes to startups, or like fast growing companies where you are pushed by investors to be very data driven and show the results. And then early on, early stages, I understand because you're focused on sales and product. But as you grow as a business and the brand becomes more of that unifier across your services and your products, then there needs to happen, a mind shift needs to happen where it's no longer about short-term metrics that build the success of the company, but it also sits alongside long-term metrics that build the brand. And the brand is more of a marathon. The brand is more of a plant that you nurture and you like grow over time. and it's not a sprint or just like a quick fixes and quick successes. And so that's where sometimes that's a challenge with smaller businesses that are growing up. And then I think larger businesses, especially the large enterprises, they're starting to realize these things.
I'm really glad you brought that up because I think there's a point in the life cycle, whether it's with a startup or a younger company, where you're absolutely right. They have to build a user base, or they have to build. It's all about sales and those kind of metrics. But if they don't make the switch, if there isn't that moment, then that's where businesses fail. That's what I've seen. So I think that's really interesting. And then there's I think something you and I talked about very briefly once was just people trying to use performance metrics when they're talking about brand it's just not the same thing.
That's the age-old question, right? When it comes to putting value behind your brand. Now, if you're the size of Coca-Cola, and those are great large brands or like Nike, where you don't even have to put the name Nike out there, and you just have that swoosh. I mean, then everyone knows in the company the value of the brand and the logo and what that means for the products and so on and so forth. But when you're a company that doesn't have that distinguishable logo or that brand presence or awareness, such as the Coca-Colas of the world, it gets hard for leadership then to explain to leadership what's the quantification and what's the value of your brand, right? And that's where data is always time. Well, show me the data. What are the metrics? What should we be tracking against that? And then if you say, well, there are metrics such as brand affiliation, brand attributes, brand awareness. Those are a little bit softer metrics, not awareness necessarily, but all those things. And that's where it gets a bit harder to see what's the for the younger companies, of course, how do we build value and how do we track that? And so, yes, I've ran into that a couple of times, and it's always an education thing. And it also comes down to how open is leadership to really putting their arms around brand and supporting it over the long run.
And the leadership teams that learn to are always the most successful because it isn't sustainable without an investment in brand and without a real commitment to it. But it is some leadership teams, depending on the pressure, depending on investors, can't get there, and it's a real shame because while it's not as quantifiable, it's kind of like saying that your reputation isn't, as a human being, isn't quantifiable.
Ooh, I love that. Wow,
it's pretty hard.
That was great. I love that one. Yes.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to say what the value of that is. Like, put a dollar amount on if people think you're a jerk. And if people respect you, what's the dollar value of that? Well,
I love that.
We all know it's a real thing, and we all put a lot of effort into it every day, especially business people. But you try to quantify your reputation. It's like, and brand and reputation are so intertwined.
I think that's such a great analogy, and one, of course, a lot of brand people use, but just like comparing a brand with a person walking into a room, right? And what are the signals that person sends off? What is that person wearing? How do they come across? That is your brand, right? And so, do you want to show up consistently as always that same, that kind of look and feel and tone, so a person recognizes, oh yeah, Mike just walked in the room? Or are you going to show up every single time very completely different, like schizophrenic, like all doing different things from A to Z, right?
So people think, I can't rely on Mike. I never know what I'm
doing. Yeah, exactly. Or I never know when Mike is going to pop by and who he will be.
Yeah, and I don't know where I stand with him because I feel unsafe.
Exactly. Unsafe, or I can't trust him or whatever. So how do you quantify that? And so if you use that, just like, look, we just want to make sure that we have a consistency there and that people recognize us when we walk in the room. That's a great achievement.
I love that analogy. We could do this all day. I love that analogy because it's, when you walk into a room, the way you're dressed, the way you present, the way you greet people, all those little intangibles, all those expressions, all those signals are a story. You are telling a story. And companies are the same way. Every touch point, every experience. I've worked with a lot of companies where you start talking about the little touch points and customer service and all the little things that are happening. And a lot of it is minutia, and it's maddening to try to get it right. But boy, does it matter. Brand brand experience, it matters so much.
Oh,
Consumers will write
absolutely.
you off. Yeah, it's crazy. What's something that you as a brand manager do that most people have no idea, that they just don't realize?
Well, I'm still trying to explain it to my parents. So,
Yeah, right. Good luck.
yeah. Oh, yeah, he does advertising. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, a little bit. That's one piece of it. I mean, I guess as a brand manager, in most cases, you come in as a brand manager, and the brand already exists. And so, what I mean by it already exists is, from a visual design, all the pieces are there, the colors, the logo, the packaging, if it's a consumer goods product, and also like how you the tone of voice and all that stuff. So people might already recognize your brand. But your role there is to really be that steward of the brand. Really, where do we now want to take it next? How do we want to position our brand versus other competitors? Especially looking at new trends that are happening in the market. Are we as a brand positioned to dive into that trend and own that trend? So be associated with that trend, or are we someone that wants to stay away from certain things? And who is the audience that we now want to go after? Are we sticking to our core audience, or are there areas of expanding the business? So, as a brand manager, I tend to look at it from on the one hand, it's very strategic because you are somewhat like a business owner. You're an entrepreneur. You're running your own business, which is your brand. And you're also, as part of that business owner, you're also managing the portfolio of products that make up your brand. So your brand it's not only about the logos and the colors and so on and so forth, but it's also all the different products, the touch points that you just mentioned, right? Customer service and sales interactions. All those things are things that you can then, those are levers, and you can twist and turn and up and down and change to position your brand better to those trends and market shifts, or opportunities, as I was saying earlier. And then the last part, so once you build a strategy and you define all of those things, you then go ahead and really build a campaign. You then say, okay, how are we now that we have this plan and this objective, how do we build out a marketing plan, a campaign, which most people would call, to go out and market our products to reach this audience. And then you work very closely with the agencies, the real creatives on the job, that build out the campaign. And my job then as a brand manager would not be to tell them exactly, I want this idea, that idea, but it's more to provide the guardrails, the directions, the budget limits, right? And then have them go ahead and do what they do.
It's very holistic. It's very like,
You see,
it
I keep
is.
on trying to explain that.
Yeah.
I've
No, I
tried it a
think you
long
did a
time.
great job, but good luck. Your parents are never going to get it. You know,
Exactly. I keep on
I
trying.
think it's one of those things where if they're like, you do advertising, you do marketing, you do management, you do all this stuff, and you're just like, yes,
Yeah.
sure, I do all of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it is a very complex, very holistic role, and I think it's a fascinating thing to do for a living, and it never gets boring. That's for sure.
Exactly. That's one of the things I love about this job is it really doesn't get boring. It is one of those things where you as a marketer sometimes have to step away because you can fall into that tunnel, right? Into that you keep on doing the same things very repetitive way. And that's when it can get dangerous as a marketer, as a brand person, to just get too comfortable. And as much as we all love to cruise, and we have enough other things happening in our lives, as a marketer you have to stay a little bit on your toes. As a brand person, you have to stay on your toes to keep that wide open view of the world, of the market, of the brands around you. So you constantly are learning, you're adapting, and so that's why I sometimes like to throw myself into new job opportunities and seek out new challenges. Right?
That's one of the things I love about our company. We work in all these different sectors, and so something I learned in manufacturing, I can then bring to healthcare. Something from healthcare, I can bring into financial. And I think really great marketers, what I've found is a lot of the marketers that I've had on the podcast or that are friends of mine, or that I talk to, are almost like Renaissance people. They learn a lot about a lot. They are students of human beings and behavior. They're part sociologists. They're part construction manager. They're part, it's a very it's a very 360 sort of way to look at the world. So you have to be interested. You have to be a person who's interested in other people and what makes them tick and then what they're doing. You can't just be like, oh, I don't like that.
You have to have a unique curiosity, right? You just
Yeah, you really
constantly have
do.
to be curious. Yeah, yeah, which is
Yeah.
fun. I mean, it's tiring sometimes because you always have to relearn things, but that's also the fun about it, right? So you're learning all at once how to, the difference of different plastic packaging, and then what does that mean for the environment, or what does that mean for logistics, and so on and so forth. So absolutely, because you're the center of that wheel that is working with all these other experts from finance to logistics, supply chain, and so on and so forth. And that's the fun part about the job, and that's why I like what I do.
Yeah, that's so cool. And that way if your parents think you're in research too, you can be like, yes, I'm in that
Yeah,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Whatever makes you happy, mom. That works for me. So what's one thing that you've noticed that marketing or brand that people focus on too much or something they don't focus on enough?
Well, not enough. Let's start with there. Something that they don't focus on. Sometimes, and I think I said it earlier. I think sometimes marketers tend to forget who they're talking to. Going back to what you said earlier is like a little bit of that arrogance where you start to craft your message or your campaign in a shape and form where you're putting yourself, your company, or your product in the center of it all. And you're putting your marketing, your campaign as the hero, right? Your product is the hero that solves everything. When in fact, what we forget is that we forget that the product is nothing with the people using, without the people using that product, right? So the heroes of the story are the people making change or creating something through your product. Your product is an enabler to that, right? And that's, I think, something that a lot of times marketers tend to forget. And so that's why you see in copy, like a lot of times in advertising copy, it's like, this product will do this, X, Y, Z, blah, 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 blah. When in fact, what about this product will allow you to, it's more of it's a very subtle shift, but one of my previous leaders, who's I'll even shout out her name, Kathleen Lefebvre. I think she's amazing at Amex. And one of the phrases she always used was, it's a quote. It's a famous quote. We're selling the outcome. So we're selling the hole in the wall, not the drill. And that is so true. And if you use that and you focus on the outcomes and and you see yourself and you position your product as an enabler, as a support, as a stepping stone to allow that customer or that business to achieve what they're seeking out to do. And if you use that perspective, then it's more humbling, it's more genuine. And I think that also builds more trust. So that's the missing part. I think these days there has been a big shift. So as exactly towards those kind of stories, the way of that mindset I was talking about, I think marketers have started to recognize that shift. I think marketers have started to recognize that it's not all about selling, it's about creating experiences, as you said earlier. And that shift you're seeing in through more and more in advertising, in the way we tell stories, the way we engage customers. And I think that's something that marketers across some brands have been doing very well. Now, don't put me on the spot right now, but marketers have been starting to put the people in the center now more so, especially since the pandemic, and realizing that it's not always just about sales. It's about creating that purpose, creating that experience that allows people to trust your brand and your product.
Yeah, it's a really great trend to see. And I think, marketers letting go of some of the marketing arrogance and realizing that it's not about you. And it's like, you see a lot of web copy or a lot of copy period that's like, we're great. We're awesome. Not we're solving a problem for you and it's about you. I think that's something that I always try to remind, clients or people I work with, is that this is about the consumer 100% of the time.
Absolutely, because they decide with their wallet, right?
Yeah. And if we keep them in the center of everything we do, we're going to succeed. Something I just love that you said is you talked about brand being almost like guardrails. how a brand is a little bit like guardrails. And how do you, it's so complex. And I think this is where a lot of marketers get overwhelmed. And depending on the size of the company, is how do you keep your brand messaging consistent when you're creating so many different things and there are so many different touch points?
Okay, so going back to purpose, I think it anchors there. So the way I tend to build those kind of things for brands, at least in my head, is strategists love building frameworks, right? The different building blocks and the pillars and so on and so forth. But that's the way I organize my thoughts, and that's very much how I also organize brands in my head. And it really centers around, all right, again, what's that brand purpose? And if we can get very crisp on that, then you can identify the key attributes of the brand that you want to make sure get across in everything we do. And that those attributes also, of course, they have to be tied to that purpose, right? So if you can craft that, if you can really crack that code and it makes sense, and everyone in the company or majority of the people in the company can resonate with that and see the linkage between from our heritage to where we're going, and that purpose is a common thread that pulls through, that is already the first line of defense in that sense, right? Because when people understand where we're going, then they will also start marching in that direction, right? If you just say we're going due north, well, there are a lot of ways. There is a due north, of course, but then some people might stray off the sides, walk around barriers, and so on and so forth. But what you just have to say is like, look, this is the course, this is the purpose. These are the three attributes we want to build against, and now let's craft the messages underneath. And so this is where you then get in more into marketing processes or brand processes, where you have teams in place that check the marketing material that's going out. Does it ladder up to those strategy points, and so on and so forth. So I don't know if that answers the question, because I know this is a huge topic.
No, it's a huge topic, and I think you did. I love asking that question because it's a really hard question. So sorry about that, but
Please,
I think it's a great question because there are a lot of marketers that don't know how to start sometimes or where to go. And I think you captured it really well, because setting up that framework and communicating it. Because one of the things you just said, and it's just crazy talk, is that internal communication of the brand is important. That's like, some people skip that. And I think skipping that step is fatal. Getting everyone on the same page and not just having the marketing and the brand people do it on their own.
Yeah, brand is the responsibility of every single employee, and I think that's what a lot of people forget. They think it's something just the advertising department does, or just the graphic designers. When in fact, you said it again. You said it just before. Like, it's every single touch point, right? It's every single interaction that a customer has with a company, with a brand, that creates a lasting impression. And that impression is what we need to make sure that we control, and we ensure that there's always a good experience, and that's why everyone has to be bought in on the brand. And so a strong brand, you can build strong brands on the outside, but it's not long lasting. It will crumble if the inside, meaning employees, do not resonate with the brand, do not believe in the brand or the purpose. So that's why I do believe in the long run, strong brands come from within. And you can see that very oftentimes in big legacy brands. If you talk to the employees, they're all a little bit like crazy about their company, which is great, because that shows that they. I mean, I left Amex, and I'm still a true blue Amex person, huge fan, because you love the brand.
Yeah, I think a few things you just touched on are so key, and I'm really glad you talked about them, because having evangelists and having people truly believe in it, and having internal brand expression and everyone understanding, takes effort and it takes clarity, but it also takes truth. It has to be real. So branding is not smoke and mirrors. It's, it's not, branding isn't advertising. It's not a thing you do. It's the truth. It's where you shine a light, and where you're shining it better be true.
I love that. I love that, Steve. Yeah, it's the truth, or you have to show up in a genuine way, especially today. I mean, today, especially younger consumers, they're ruthless in that sense that they will see through it. They will see through it. If you're trying to be someone that you're not, and you're not being genuine in the way you show up, that's also sometimes the end of a lot of good brands because they try to go down this trend road just because it's popular, but then they lose sight of their core reason, their purpose, and you can't just show up differently just because that's what it's the trend of the time.
Yeah, one of my favorite marketers or brand marketers and brand leaders that I had on the podcast, Patricia Corsi, who's the CMO of Bear, the global CMO of Bear. And the way she talks about brand purpose captures a lot of what you said about how it's not about jumping on every trend. It's not about just because something's hot, all of a sudden you're talking about it. It's about being who you are and talking about being passionate about the things that your brand is passionate about and supporting those. So I think, everything aligns when it's real, when it's true, and when you can prove it and it's reflected in behavior. Let me ask you a couple of questions that are just sort of a little bit about you as we start to come towards the end of our time together here today. So what's something you've changed your mind about as you've moved through your career? What's something that that you used to think is true that now you're like, maybe not?
I guess I was a little bit of a uber idealist in the way I looked at the world, very black or white kind of thing. Um, and one of the things that when I was in university, I remember I was like, I'm never going to work for a financial institution. No way. I was like, I'm not going to work for the machine kind of thing, and thought I'm going to work for cool, fun brands. And well, then it changed. Obviously, once I joined American Express later on in my career, I just learned how it doesn't come down to necessarily the industry. Within the industry, you can have amazing organizations that are doing things in different ways. And even within certain brands that you might think are, oh my God, these, they are 150 years old or whatever, and, they don't know what to do. Every company, if they're investing in thinking forward and new ways of marketing and brand, they have their team of experts that are really pushing the thinking, pushing the agenda internally. And if you can get into those teams, it doesn't matter the industry, it doesn't matter the company. It really matters about the teams you can be with. And those are the ones that are the fun places to be. And so that's my shift and change is like, now I won't discredit any industry. I will just, if the team sounds cool and the projects that they're working sounds cool, and it excites me, I'll dive right into it.
That's cool. I love that. I think that that's one of the things when you're young, you definitely know, you know an awful lot, don't you?
Oh
And then
yeah,
as
you have
you
everything
just know.
figured out.
Yeah, you got to figure it out. I'd never ever do that or think about that. And then as you get some experience, you're like, man, I was so arrogant.
Oh, totally.
You know?
I admit it. I didn't have
Yeah.
it figured out at all.
Well, it takes a long time and maybe we never do, but we certainly get better at it. So what would you name, I know you've just started a new gig and you've got a lot going on. You're in the middle of moving. What would you name this chapter of your life right now?
Oh, that's cool. I guess it would be, on the one hand, it's change, but I think change is not like, it's more pushing limitations. I'm right now, so I'm in my early 40s, and I am focused on seeing how far I can push it in terms
Yeah.
of my capabilities, my skills. I've learned from such great brands and great organizations, and I've acquired really good skills that I want to bring to the forefront. So working with teams and people and companies that um, want to see how far we can go with certain things and seeing what am I capable of is what from a professional standpoint where I am in life. And I'm just excited about that. And then just in general, I think I'm also when it comes to just on the personal side, my wife and I were seeking to travel and work remotely, take advantage of this remote first kind of world we're in. I mean, it's exciting. It has its pros and cons, of course, but we want to discover. So actually, that's maybe the right term, discovery. It's this part is all about discovery.
Yeah, it sounds like it. It sounds like you're at a really cool phase that's discovery and pushing through to new adventures and new horizons. And dude, that's super cool. I'm really happy for you. You know, you can tell talking to you because you have this like really bright, adventurous energy, and it's just
Oh, I appreciate it. Appreciate
yeah,
it.
it's just a really cool thing. I'm really happy for you. That's where you are. Let me give you a sentence to finish as we start to wrap up here. If you weren't a brand manager, what would you be?
A teacher.
Really? That's cool.
Yeah, a teacher. I was thinking of being a teacher, but then I thought, well, maybe as in corporate, I make more money. As a kid, that's the way I was thinking. But
Right.
I do love to teach. So
Well, I'm sure as a brand manager, you spend a lot of time teaching. You know, that's another
trying
thing you
to,
can tell you can tell your parents that, and then they'll be like, "Oh, he's a teacher. I'm so proud."
yeah, I'm a teacher on the side too.
Yeah, I'm just teaching people how to deal with this brand. Yeah, that's pretty cool. For you in marketing and brand, it's such a huge topic. There's so much nuance to it. What is a must read or a must watch or must listen for you? What would you recommend for other people that inspires you?
Okay. Some things just came up to mind. Of course, I'm like, all right. Starting off, I'm a big Star Wars nerd, so
Yeah,
I bring a
that's
lot of
great.
I find a lot of inspiration from Star Wars, from the storytelling to thinking what role does if we were one of the figures as a brand, which figure would we be?
Oh, that's cool. I like that.
So I associate a lot with there. But some more recent shows that I think I was quite like I'm just interested from a brand story perspective is also like things like Inventing Anna on Netflix. It's just the power of storytelling. I mean, yes, it's a con artist, of course, but at the end of the day, if you think about what she was doing, she was building a brand. She was building her brand, and she was telling a story. Now, obviously, you do not want to be associated with telling lies, but I mean, what I thought was just it's just incredible. It's just the power of storytelling and the power of persuasion, and what that means to building brands.
I love that. It's interesting when I ask people in brand that question, a lot of times they come back with movies and things in
Yeah,
culture
yeah,
and not books and things like that because they're ingesting these things and I'm not judgmental about stories because a good story is a good story. Like, so Inventing Anna compared to a Star Wars story, compared to really any story, like, Andor that's out right now is really quite well done because the writing is so good.
oh my
It
god, I
actually
love it.
respects the audience. But
Yes,
that's one of the things that people in brand do, is they ingest stories and they learn from them.
I'm a visual learner too. I'm very much a visual person. So when I tackle like challenges, I'm a whiteboard, sticky notes, putting it all out there, creating chaos, and then in my chaos, I then find order. Right, I create order, and that's the way I digest information. So yes, movies, images, all the things I love.
That's really cool. Well, I encourage people to do that too. Watch, ingest, watch great movies, watch new movies, watch old movies. The
Hmm.
more stories you put in, the better you are as a storyteller.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
I love stories. So, last question, because I do have to let you go at some point, even though I think we could probably talk all day. If you could give your younger self any advice, what advice would you give?
Just have fun. I think that's what I would say. Just have fun. Don't take things too serious. Mistakes happen. It's not the end of the world, and lean into it. Really, I think one thing I've learned over the years is if you try to control your destiny too much, you tend to get disappointed, or you tend to miss the opportunities that actually present themselves. And so if you lean into the flow of things, if you lean into it and not be too afraid of misstepping, saying something wrong, then most of the times good will come out of it, and you will find your way. Oh man, I wish I could talk to myself now. Oh,
I know. Wouldn't that be great if you could go back and tell that knucklehead that?
yeah,
You know,
totally.
like same guy that thought he all figured out exactly what
Yeah,
industries he would work in.
absolutely.
Yeah. No, that was a great answer. I love those. Sometimes we pull those answers, the younger self question out of different guests we've had, and they're all just really eloquent, and that was a great one because I think you hold on to things too tightly and they slip right through your hands, and just like you do that to yourself as well. Well, man, thank you so much for being here today.
Hey, Steve, thanks for having me. I mean, this has been such a pleasure, and I really appreciate you just taking the time to speak all this nerdy brand stuff with me. So I loved it.
Want to hear more inspiring stories? Subscribe on your preferred podcast app so you don't miss an episode. And if you like what we're doing, please rate, review, and share. It's the best way to support us. Thank you for listening to Brand Story.